We're going to show a picture. Tell me he's going to show a picture. That's not the frame I told you. Yes. It's a Spanish tortilla. Potato and egg and garlic on potato. There's a lot of
I mean, I did one weekend, and I walked around places many times a day, because they serve Jack cafes, Jack houses.
As they should. Hopeful, I should feed you.
Are you going to see Oh, you see tomorrow?
No, tomorrow is in. No, I don't know.
No, I'm surprised that the person was carrying somebody else.
Upstairs neighbor.
Didn't wake me up, it reminded me of something.
I'm not going to my capacity. Not going to sign any checks.
No, we work a lot with you.
I'm sure.
All right, so I don't know, people can kind of gather around.
There's the seat right there. You might as well grab it.
Hi again.
Well, it's very good to be here. Thanks to Virginia and Cliff, Ellen, Judith, and Odelia. Odella. And who am I missing for preparing the food during the evening? Denise. We said Denise. All right. And Denise and Denise. So anyway, but thank you very much and all of you for coming. Yeah, like Ellen says, I'm the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, which is kind of a weird name. But we're an Israeli human rights and peace organization, but political. One of the problems these days is that there are a lot of human rights organizations that kind of distance themselves from the politics, and that's not a good thing. So we emphasize that we're a political organization that's dedicated to ending the Israeli occupation, which used to mean a two-state solution. That was the code for a two-state solution. In other words, this middle map is the map of the two-state solution, as it's known, in which the occupied territories, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, are intended to be a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. This is the solution that's been advanced for many years by the international community, led by the United States, the erstwhile United States, led by the United States. In other words, in the last couple of years, the latest initiative has been the roadmap. in which the two-state solution is the basis of that conception. The two-state solution isn't really a just solution. It's not a fair solution. I mean, it sounds good on paper. Two peoples, two states, Palestinian state next to the state of Israel. But in fact, as you can see from this map, it's not exactly a 50-50 split of a small country. If we consider this one country between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, the Jews call it the land of Israel. Palestinians call it Palestine. The religious people call it the Holy Land. Whatever you call it, it's really one integral unit. In this country today, half the population is Palestinian. Today. Now there are almost 4 million Palestinian refugees living around in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. So if even some of them return to the country, you're going to have a Palestinian majority in this country. And yet, the two-state solution says that Israel, with, in a sense, a Jewish minority, will be on 78% of the country. And a Palestinian state that includes the majority of the population will be on only 22% of the land of the country.
What happened with the map? It was half the population, now they're the majority of the population.
No, I'm saying,
Okay.
today they're half.
Land.
Wait,
Today they're half.
no,
If anyone returns.
oh, so you're saying if the projected return,
Of refugees.
okay.
Right. Because if there, whatever solution there is, refugees are going to return. Now, all the 4 million aren't going to return. As a matter of fact, there's even been research that's been done by Palestinians that say probably no more than 10% would actually return. In other words, in a way, it's like a straw man that Israel is kind of presenting, this right of return issue, and we can't agree because we'll be inundated with Arabs. And probably the vast majority wouldn't return. They would either stay where they are, especially in Syria and Jordan, or they'd be resettled to other countries, especially those in Lebanon. Europe, Australia is willing to accept a lot. Canada is willing to bring in others and so on, with compensation, of course. But 10%. But let's say 10% of 4 million is still 400,000 people. So I mean, you're still talking about within Israel, Palestine. It's still that would be. I mean, you would still have a tipping in a sense, in which you'd have a Palestinian majority. That's what I'm saying. But even so, even without that majority, today half the population is Palestinian, and yet the two-state solution. The maximal two-state solution is a Palestinian state on less than a quarter of the land. So the two-state solution in some ways is skewered very much in favor of Israel. I mean, the worst case scenario is that Israel remains on 78% of the country, which isn't exactly a terrible thing. And despite the fact that it's not really fair to Palestinians, the Palestinians have agreed to this two-state solution for more than 20 years now. In 1988, the PLO, when it really represented all the Palestinians in the camps, in the diaspora, I mean, it represented all the Palestinians before Hamas, the PLO accepted the two-state solution more than 20 years ago. Which raises the question, if Israel really wants peace and security, which is what it's always telling us, we just want peace and security, why didn't it grab the two-state solution 20 years ago? You wouldn't have had to gone through Oslo, you would have missed 2 intifadas, you wouldn't have had to gone through, any of this stuff. Before any of that, the two-state solution, 78% of the country was offered to Israel by the Palestinians. So something else is going on here, beyond peace and security. Now, the two-state solution was also accepted by the Arab League, unanimously in 2002, in what's called the Arab Peace Initiative that came out of Beirut in 2002. So that the Arab League said to Israel, if you relinquish the occupied territories, we'll not only make peace with you, we will integrate you into the Middle East. There was even talk of Israel becoming a member of the Arab League. So, in other words, you've got, in a sense, everybody agrees that this is a solution. It's a pro-Israel solution. The only holdout is Israel. Israel says no. Israel says no. Because Israel basically wants to control the entire country. It wants to control the entire country, and it feels that there really isn't any force out there that it can see that would prevent it from doing so. So if you think you can win, if you think you can have the whole thing, then why compromise on 3/4 or more than 3/4? And so what Israel has done, and sometimes I show this map for comic relief. So if anybody can tell me where a viable sovereign Palestinian state's going to emerge here, maybe Obama would relinquish his Nobel Peace Prize. This is a map of what I call, of the West Bank, of what I call the matrix of control. Because Israel hasn't only said, no, we want the whole country, it's embedded that policy in what we call facts on the ground. The idea is to establish such massive, permanent facts on the ground that, that the whole issue of a viable Palestinian state will become irrelevant. That the Israeli control will be irreversible and permanent. And therefore, it doesn't matter if we go into negotiations or not, the outcome is known from the outset. So that, just really quickly, what Israel's done is this. You see all these brown areas, and I know I'm saying some things that people know, but we won't assume that everybody does. These brown areas all through the West Bank are called areas A and B. I'm not going to get into detail, but they constitute 40% of the occupied territories, together with Gaza. Gaza is like a cage. So these are the areas where 95% of the Palestinians are confined. Areas A and B and Gaza represent 40% of the occupied territories. So in other words, 95% of the Palestinians are confined to 40% of 22% of the country. And then that's fragmented into more than 70 islands. More than 70 islands, as you can see, and some of them are tiny little islands, all surrounded by Israeli settlements. So all these blue areas here are Israeli settlements. There's more than 150 settlements in the occupied territories. Now you can't explain settlements by security. See, that's the framing that that's how Israel presents it. Everything is for security. We're defending ourselves against terrorism. That's the mantra you hear all the time. Well, you can't explain 150 settlements by security. And Israel has never claimed a security reason for them. They represent a proactive claim to the country because Israel denies that it has an occupation. You will never, ever, ever hear a pro-Israel spokesperson use the word occupation. Israel denies there's an occupation. Israel says, this is our country. How can you occupy your own country? And at the same time, this is not called the West Bank in Israel. It's called Judea and Samaria, using the biblical terms. We don't use the word settlements in Israel. You talk about communities. And you don't use the word Palestinian. We don't talk about Palestinians because that gives too much recognition, distinctiveness, legitimacy to another collective that with rights of self-determination that we don't accept. So imagine getting into a political conversation with Israeli Jews in which there are no Palestinians, there's no occupation, and there are no settlements. There are simply Jews living in communities in Judea and Samaria. And if that's the case, then why are they attacking us? It's like a mugging. In other words, it's all depoliticized. So the only explanation for terrorism is then, well, they must be anti-Semitic. Because there's no other reason. Why would they attack us? We're just peaceful people living here that are walking home from work and we get attacked. In other words, for Israeli Jews, the whole situation has been very depoliticized. So that the Palestinians are confined to these areas, all surrounded by, each island surrounded by settlements. Each of these islands is also surrounded, as you can see, by Israeli highways. These are 29 major highways that link the settlements into Israel proper that are for Israelis only. And you've got more than 600 obstacles to movement within all these islands and between these islands and Israel proper. So that between 1967 and 1993, when the Oslo peace process began, Israel had a policy of de-developing the occupied territories, destroying the agriculture, destroying industry. No bank was allowed to open in the occupied territories. And so the Arab workers were thrown into a dependency on the Israeli economy. Every day, about 150,000 Palestinian workers would cross into Israel to work as cheap labor. Well, beginning ironically, with the start of the Oslo peace process, Israel instituted what we call a closure over these territories, so that today no Palestinian workers come into Israel at all. So at the same time that they don't have access to the Israeli economy, they have a scorched earth back home. In some ways, it's worse than apartheid was in South Africa. I mean, you can't really compare systems of oppression, but worse in the sense that the Bantustans in South Africa were intended as reserves of cheap black African labor that would work in white South Africa. Here you've got a Bantustan in which the Palestinian workers are not allowed into Israel because Israel found a cheaper source of labor, and that's foreign workers. There are about 300,000 workers from Thailand, the Philippines, China, Romania, West Africa that work in Israel that are cheaper than Palestinians. And you can exploit them. I'm not going to get into that right now. So the Palestinians are permanently cut out of the Israeli economy, meaning then that they're living in these islands and all surrounded, like I said, by checkpoints. Now, just to put this for a second into an American context for you, the occupied territories are an area the size of the state of Delaware.
Sorry.
No problem.
Combined? They're all
Yeah,
combined?
combined. The West Bank and Gaza are an area the size of Delaware with 5 times the population of Delaware. Okay? Now, take the population of Delaware, 5 times the population of Delaware, and crunch it into 40% of the area of Delaware.
What is the population of Delaware? It could be 5 people.
Delaware's about 850,000 people. I mean, I'm trying not to get into details.
We don't know. We're New Yorkers.
Yeah.
That's right.
But it doesn't matter, really. I mean, it matters how big it is. That's the
It
point.
does matter a lot.
850,000, and there are almost 4 million Palestinians in the occupied territories. So you take then 5 times the population of Delaware, concentrate it into 40% of the area of Delaware, and then shatter it into 70 little islands, all surrounded by settlements and checkpoints of hostile Pennsylvanians. And you begin to get the idea, so that in the occupied territories, there are more than 600 obstacles to movement. Checkpoints, earthen mounds over the entrances and exits to Palestinian towns and villages and cities. So that, you know, there's a tremendous fragmentation. Now, Israel doesn't accept the two-state solution. It doesn't accept this because we want to control the whole country. But there's a problem. The problem is that there are almost 4 million Palestinians in the occupied territories that we can't get rid of. We're stuck with them. You see? In other words, we can't throw them out of the country. We tried in 1948. In 1948, half the Palestinian population was driven out. More than 700,000 Palestinians at that time. And we say in Israel, it's a phrase we use, that we've never finished 1948. But for PR reasons.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you telling me that no Arabs live in the whole rest of the country?
No, I'm not
Thank
telling you
you.
that.
Excuse me?
No,
Okay.
I said half of them were driven out.
No, the state of Israel,
In the state
Right.
of Israel today,
you're telling me,
there were 1.5 million Palestinians in the entire country
right,
in 1947. In 1948, during the war, half of them, more than 700,000, were driven out of these areas that became Israel.
okay.
So there were about, in what became Israel, there were about 150,000 Palestinians that remained.
Right now.
No, that remained in 1948.
Okay.
50 years.
So what Israel did in 48 also was then to destroy almost all their villages, more than 500 villages, in order to what we call Judaize the country. All the place names are changed from Arabic to Hebrew and so on.
Build it.
But today, after 60-some years, from 48 until today, the population, the Arab Palestinian population has grown, so there are today about 1.3 million Palestinian citizens of Israel. Not in the occupied territory, citizens of Israel. They're about 20% of the Israeli population. So the idea then is that we can't, pardon me?
They do have a vote.
They have the vote.
They do have a vote.
They have the vote. But Israel is conceived as a Jewish country. So if you look at the flag is the Star of David. So it doesn't include them, obviously. So that they're second-class citizens. They have the vote, but just to give you one example, the land of Israel, the land of the country of Israel, is all owned by the state. Almost all of it's owned by the state, 94%. Because the idea is that it's land that's held in custody for all the Jews. It belongs to all the Jews of the world, not simply in Israel. So that by law, non-Jews are not allowed to live on 94% of the land of Israel, including non-Jewish citizens. So if you're Jewish living in New York, you can live anywhere in this country, including the West Bank. Gaza, probably not. But, but if you're a citizen of Israel, who's an Arab, you're excluded from 94% of the land of your own country.
When you say live, do you mean own or do you mean live?
Nobody owns the land.
Right.
The land is owned by the
So
state.
when the 20% Arab population of the state of Israel
Right.
are you telling me that they're not allowed to
To
rent
live.
apartments
That's right.
and
Rent apartments, build apartments on 94% of the country. They're confined to 6% of the land, And even that is not really 6% because it's zoned as agricultural. There's all kinds of things. But what I'm saying is formally they have citizenship. And they have the vote and everything. But in terms of actual rights, Israel is not, you know, Israel presents itself as a democracy. And it looks on the surface like a democracy. Everybody's voting and everything else. But the fancy academic name for what Israel is an ethnocracy. In other words, an ethnocracy is when a country belongs to one particular people. You know, so that what we've considered racist in a democracy like the United States. Now I know there's racism here. I'm not doing something ideal, but conceptually, what would be considered racist here is not considered racist in Israel. For example, the policy of Israel, it's an explicit policy, it's written down, is that Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, should be 72% Jewish. There should be a Jewish majority of 72%, over an Arab minority of 28%. Now, obviously, if you had a policy in New York City that 72% of the population should be white, and I'm sure there are people that would like that, but it would be considered, that's considered racist, because in a democracy, anytime one particular group privileges itself over others, that's racist in that system. Here, it's fine. Israelis will say to you, we don't understand what your problem is. To Judaize Jerusalem. Of course we're Judaizing Jerusalem and making it Jewish. That's the whole idea of Zionism. We're reclaiming our holy capital. We're reclaiming our ancient homeland. What's wrong with that? So you've got a real disconnect between the concept of a democracy in the West and this concept of an ethnocracy that you have in Israel.
Okay, I was just thinking also disconnect in understanding the reality of a people that's having more children than the Jews in Israel. And
And the secular Jews.
Yeah, the secular Jews. I'm picturing a pot, you know, with a lid on it. You can't do that to a people. And I'm saying
They've been doing it
for they have for years, and I agree. But that's going to explode. It has to.
It
is. It has to. It is.
Well, and it's what we call the demographic threat.
Yeah.
I mean, Israelis are aware of that.
You mentioned the diaspora of 400, how many Palestinians outside the country that would maybe 10%,
Right.
maybe.
Of 4 million.
How many Jews do you think are outside of Israel that might?
Well, that's-
been any studies
right.
done?
No, and that's one of the problems here.
going there.
One of the problems is that you're trying to maintain a Jewish majority in Israel, but you're also trying to incorporate another 2.5 to 4 million Arabs within your country.
But look at the way they're trying to incorporate.
No, exactly. No, and I'm saying, so you've got, in Israel there are about 5.5 million Jews. In the world, there's something like maybe 14 million, something like that. In the United States, there's 6 million Jews. But only 1%, this is interesting, only 1% of American Jews ever went to Israel. There are 60,000 American Jews that live in Israel. This is by far the largest reservoir of potential immigrants, let's say. I mean, in principle, you've got another 8-9 million Jews. I mean, and the whole discussion becomes very objective. You know, Jews become numbers and objects instead of people. But from the Israeli point of view, you've got another 8-9 million potential immigrants that if they would come, it's over. Now we can probably outnumber. It's a whole crazy demographic game like that. But it's not going to happen because American Jews have made it very clear that they're very happy. And they might be AIPAC, they might support Israel, they might love Israel, they might everything else, but they're not going to go to Israel. And 80% probably of the 1% are religious Jews, you know, that go there, not secular Jews. You know, and even the Russian Jews, you know, you had a million immigrants who came from Russia. A third of them weren't Jewish, first of all. There's about 300,000 to 400,000 Russians that we call ethnic Russians, not that aren't Jewish. They got in because they're married to Jews or they had a Jewish grandfather or something.
Wait, I thought, what qualifies as Jewish?
Well, that's the question.
Oh.
That's the question. I mean, formally,
Anything but a Palestinian, huh?
no, formally, of course, a Jew was someone that has a Jewish mother. A Jewish mother. Or a grandmother, but going through the mother's side. The father's side doesn't count. But because of this demographic issue, that's been loosened a lot. So that today, especially if the Russians, today, if your father was Jewish, it's okay. If your grandfather was Jewish, it's okay. If your grandfather's best friend was Jewish, no problem. In other words, so you end up with all these Russians that are, I mean, I'm not going to get into all this, but it's very weird. You know, you have a neo-Nazi skinhead Russian movement in Israel. I mean, they're finding all these neo-Nazi cells of Russians, and I mean, it gets very weird. But it's all a part, because you're in this unnatural, is that the 5.5 million Jews here are trying to control make the whole country Jewish, but it's true, they don't have the numbers to do that. And so you end up becoming very repressive. So, for example, it's true that Arabs have, the Arabs in Israel have the vote. But there's a law, for example, there's a law in Israel that an Israeli citizen, and they mean Arab citizens, but you know, you don't put it that way. An Israeli citizen who marries someone from an Arab country, including the West Bank or Gaza, cannot bring his or her spouse to live inside Israel. You see, because that's considering, you know, then you're bringing the Arab, now Jews aren't going to do that, so it's obviously geared towards the Arab population. But this is an absolutely fundamental violation of the human right to have a family.
Arabs, are you saying?
Hmm?
You mean Jews
don't marry Arabs. Here and there's one or two cases, but it's
Of
not
course.
in other words, what I'm saying is it's framed in that way, Israeli citizens, so it doesn't appear discriminatory, but the intention is it's aimed at Arabs. All right. At any rate, then, all right, because I want to show you a few pictures, and I don't want to talk too long. I want to show you a little bit, for those that haven't been there, some of what happens in the occupation. The point I'm trying to make is, because Israel can't throw the Palestinians out of the country, and because Israel will not, even if it considers this one country, can't make it one country, because you can't give the Arabs citizenship. Because then it wouldn't be a Jewish, of the occupied territories, because then it wouldn't be a Jewish country anymore. And we won't give them a state, even on the 22%, because that's too much land of ours to give to Arabs. So the very logic is to go towards apartheid. And that's the language we use. An apartheid system like you had in South Africa. The same concept. In South Africa, the issue was, how do we create a white democracy in a country with a black majority? And the answer was, you create what they called Bantustans. Most of us remember those. 10 Bantustans on 11% of South African land. Or even, they use the language too in a very creative way like we do. They call them homelands.
Yeah.
I mean, who can object to giving these black Africans homelands? You see, and that's what Israel says. We'll give the Palestinians a homeland that no one else has ever done. Jordanians never did it, the British never did it, the Ottoman Turks never did it. we Israelis are going to be really nice to the Palestinians and we'll give them a homeland. But it's a Bantustan concept. Because it's the same dynamic. The problem here is, how do you create a Jewish democracy in a country with a non-Jewish majority? And it's the same answer. You create a Palestinian Bantustan. In other words, the idea is a canton, that's the word we use, a canton in the north of the West Bank, a canton in the center, a canton in the south, in Gaza. And then you can begin to see this on this map. You see, the pink areas are the major settlement blocks that Israel wants to keep, including what we call Greater Jerusalem. That really, Greater Jerusalem means that you're cutting the economic center out of any Palestinian state. And so if you look at that, now you see the canton emerging here, and there's a canton here in the center. Jericho is kind of a problem, but it's in here. A canton in the south, and then Gaza. So that's where Israel is headed. Now, how do we do this? Let me just show you, just take a couple minutes and just show you some of the ways in which, some of these facts on the ground. First of all, we establish settlements. So that this is a settlement, you see, and you can, and these are this is a Palestinian village down here. So you can see that settlement is built for domination. For domination. You can see the dense building here. This is 30,000 people, and it's still being built. You see, with its own road. You see, this is an Israeli-only road in which there is no exit and entrance for the Arab population around.
Not even the Israeli Arabs. It's Jews only.
No, it's Jews only. Now, in some settlements,
Car checkpoints? I mean, how do you know who's driving the car?
there you either have checkpoints or you have police cars that check. The license plates in Jerusalem are yellow. The license plates in the West Bank are another color, green and white, and so you can tell from that way as well. In Jerusalem, it's a little bit harder, but you have checkpoints and you've got surveillance and so on. Now, just to see, to compare, you see, all this land, including this land actually, belongs to Palestinians. But there's a policy for the last 42 years, since 1967, of not granting building permits to Palestinians. Almost entirely. So that you froze Palestinian building in 1967. Which means then the Palestinians don't build. So you see and then that land is a reserve of land for Israeli settlements and Israeli building. And the Palestinians are then confined to these little places. Now they do build, as I'll show you. You can see there's new building going on here. But it's all building that's done, and then you get a demolition order from the Israeli authorities. So that there are tens of thousands of demolition orders. I'll show you in a minute. And this is a new settlement that's being built in an Arab-Palestinian part of Jerusalem called Jabal Mukabir. And this is the picture that the real estate people are putting up. So you can see, here's the Jewish community, and there's no Arabs. The only Arab presence you see is these kind of romantic, kind of a few little biblical houses here and there as background in the landscape. It's not true at all. This is a heavily populated, dense Palestinian population in which demolitions take place, but in order to sell the real estate, you have to sort of erase and eliminate the Arabs from the picture. And house demolitions.
That's the way you do it.
Since 1967, Israel's demolished 24,000 Palestinian homes.
Where do those people go
And
then?
I'll mention that in a second. Now, when I say a home, I mean this, for example, this is a, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-story building. So let's say here, there's 10, 15 families here. But it counts as one demolition. So when I say 24,000, it's actually many more families than simply 24,000. that are demolished because of two things. First of all, because of the building permit issue, that they're not given building permits, and so these are considered illegal buildings. But also, many houses are demolished in military operations. In the last invasion of Gaza, some 4,000 homes were demolished. Not as military targets, simply really to clear the table as a kind of a collateral damage or something. And let me just give you just an example. I'll take a couple minutes and I'll walk you through a demolition. Is that okay? You with me or not? When I start to hear snoring, I'll start to wrap up. This is a family, Salim, his wife Arabia, and their 7 kids, that bought a small piece of land near Jerusalem. And they applied 3 times for a building permit to the Israeli authorities. What's called the civil administration in the West Bank. Because Israel's trying to present an image of proper administration. It's not the army, it's a civil administration. They applied 3 times, and each time they were refused. And the overall way of refusing is that Israel has zoned the West Bank as agricultural land. So that any time a Palestinian wants to build a home on land that he or she owns, the answer is sorry, but this is agricultural land. Now, when you want to build a settlement, of course, we sit in the planning commissions. So to rezone from agriculture to residential takes a minute if you want to do it. The Palestinians don't sit in any bodies of authority. Each time the family applied, it cost them $5,000. So you make it really unaffordable. So finally, like thousands of other Palestinian families, they built a small home for themselves on their land, and immediately they got a demolition order. But Palestinians do a kind of a cold gamble, a cold calculated risk. They say, look, there's tens of thousands of demolition orders that people have. Israel can't demolish all those houses. So we'll build. Maybe they won't come for a year. Maybe they won't come for 5 years. And in 5 years there'll probably be peace. Something will happen. Maybe they'll never come. It's like winning the lottery in reverse, you see. So you build, and immediately you always get a demolition order. This family lived in their home for 5 years, without getting, lived in their home. Now, they weren't living in their home securely and relaxed, because at any day, bulldozers can come to demolish the house. I mean, there's always that anxiety and fear. But they were in their house until one day, in 1998, there's a knock on the door. And this is Rami, who, as you can see, is a civilian employee, and armed. I don't know what civil servants look like in Mayor Bloomberg City, but maybe there's some areas where they look like this as well, but this is what they look like in the West Bank. And this is Micha. And they're civil employees, which means that they're settlers, because the civil administration is located in the middle of the West Bank. So the only Israeli civilians that can get there to work are settlers that are ideologically committed to getting Arabs out of the country, and who, are then put in positions of authority to decide which Palestinians, or Arabs as we call them, can have a house or which not. So, but accompanied, of course, by soldiers. So, in the middle of the day, family's having lunch, and there's a knock on the door. Salim opens the door, and this is what he sees. And Rami says to him, "Is this your home?" Salim says, "Yes, it's my home." He says, "No, it isn't. It's our home now. You got 15 minutes to get all your belongings out. We're going to demolish it." Now, it's not a normal human reaction to say, "Dear, would you please help me take out the dining room table?" You protest, right? You'd resist, you'd yell. And when that happens, it becomes resistance, and here's where the soldiers literally kick in. And Salim was beaten and thrown out of his house. Now, in all the commotion, Arabia managed to slam the door shut and lock it with her and her kids inside. You see? So what the soldiers did is they broke the windows of the house and they threw tear gas into the house to flush the family out. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a whiff of tear gas outside, which is pretty strong. Imagine inside your home. And then they broke in the door. Arabia was carried out unconscious. The kids running and screaming in all directions. And then we come into the act. You know, here I am in my
Crucifix.
This is in my office. In my office. If we can, because again we get no forewarning. This happens all of a sudden. There's no warning, so that the families call us if we can get there in time. We get there to resist the demolition. We chain ourselves in the house. We get arrested. This is Arik Asherman from a group of rabbis for human rights. There's 100 rabbis that are with us, and so on.
Are they Israeli?
Israeli.
Yes.
Finally, the family's out of the house. We're out of the house. And so the civil administration subcontracts to commercial companies to demolish homes. So the owner of the company says to his workers, this is a guy from Romania, go, you got 10 minutes, just throw everything out. And so, I mean, you imagine what you have in your home. I mean, your home is your sacred space. And everything, as you can see, is torn out. The kitchen cabinets, you know, the pictures you have on the wall, your kids' toys, your papers, everything you have is just chucked out of the house like this. And then the bulldozer comes to demolish the house.
How do they get people to do such things to other people?
We have city
And-
marshals that do
and
the
Jewish
same thing every day.
Is that a caterpillar?
Not quite.
That's a,
They
yeah.
don't come in
Is
with
that
the
a
guns and the
caterpillar?
bulldozers.
They
Come in with
have-
guns and
Yeah,
they
they
do
do.
guns,
Guns.
kick in doors.
Yeah.
Yep, they do. So we sell that.
American soldiers did that.
We sell that. That's our caterpillar.
That's one of the caterpillars.
That's made in
And I'll
the
show you
US.
another one. Yeah, that's right. That does
So
that.
it's tear gas. Yeah, we sell them all the weapons. That's all we make in this country anymore.
And here, this kind of a tragedy. The driver of the bulldozer is a Palestinian.
Oh,
You
no.
know, he's just a guy that works for that company. So one day he comes to work and the boss says you're going to build a house. The next day he comes and he says you're going to go demolish houses. And he knew Salim, this fellow. So you can imagine, you know, what's going on in the heads of the Palestinians. And the important thing to emphasize at this stage is that these are not terrorists. Again, that's the way Israel frames it.
And they're not accused of being terrorists.
They're not accused of being terrorists. He's not in jail. You know, in other words, there's no security issue here. It isn't that, you know, because the knee-jerk reaction is, when I say house demolitions, people say, well, they're houses of terrorists. So, okay. No, it's not true. They're not houses of terrorists. Pardon me?
That's what the press leads you to.
It leads you to believe.
Wow.
So that the house is destroyed. The house is destroyed. Now what we do, and that's actually the purpose of tonight, with the fundraising that we'll get into later, is that we part of our resistance to the occupation is to rebuild homes that have been demolished.
Well, how do you get the permits to build?
We don't get the permits. It's civil disobedience. We can't get, first of all, we can't get permits. And second of all, even if we did, we wouldn't. Because our argument is that it's illegal to demolish homes. In international law, Israel has no right to plan or extend its legal system into an occupied territory.
Wait a second. What about local law?
No. This is
You
an
don't
occupied.
observe local law when you go to the local place?
There is no local law,
That's right.
no, the local law is the occupation.
That's right. To have a local law, you have to have a mayor, you have to have a city council. Israel's eliminated all of those. There's no local authorities because it's all under occupation.
It's agricultural land.
And it's and if you look at it,
Right.
so this is civil disobedience.
I'm sure
what
this
we're
is a
doing.
naive statement, but
But
what
don't you
about
need-
the international law? I
No, that's right. And that's what we're trying, that's of course what we argue. In international law, this is all illegal because the Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits occupying powers from punishing a local population, from moving its civilian population into an occupied area, from doing anything to harm and from replacing their local law. That's true. In international law, the local law remains, and you're not allowed to impose your own law, which Israel does, because it had through the civil administration.
But
I
nobody
thought you
punishes
said there
them.
was no
Takes them.
No,
local law.
No, there is no local law. It's Israeli law.
What is it?
That's through the civil
It's
administration.
more local than international Geneva conventions, no?
No.
No.
There is no local law. It's actually what rules the West Bank and Gaza to some degree. But the West Bank is a corpus of military orders. That's how Israel gets around that. Israel doesn't, in a sense, extend its legal system, but it has military orders that say the civil administration now has the authority to issue building permits. The civil, you see, so in a way, you're imposing your own law, but to avoid violating international law so up front, you do it in the form of military orders, rather than in the form of actual law.
But there is some written process by which you get a building permit. At least you get
That's
to pay $5,000
That's right.
to apply for
To
a
the
building.
Israeli authorities.
Of course,
That's right.
you have to pay it
That's
to
right.
somebody.
That's right. But that's illegal. We
Odella,
say in international law.
maybe if, because Jeff has a presentation, if he could get through the presentation, you can talk to him afterwards
That's
about the
a good
fine
idea.
legal points, because I know
No, it's
Odella
not
is a
very
lawyer,
fine.
and she,
It's not
so,
very fun.
All right.
so, but maybe you could do that afterwards, but I
I
think
will.
maybe let Jeff get through a little
Thank
bit of the,
you.
okay.
No, the point is that Israel has well, it does two things. First of all, it set a whole layer of its own military laws over the occupied territories, which is legal in Israel, from Israel's point of view, but it's illegal internationally. In the Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits that. The other thing is that it does use, what you're supposed to do is respect existing legal systems. So Israel does that too. So it takes laws that are Jordanian or Ottoman laws that are convenient, that suit its purpose, and when necessary, they use them. For example, in Ottoman law, if there is now, obviously this isn't agriculture, but let's say this was agricultural land. In Ottoman law, if you don't plant and cultivate your field for 3 years, it reverts to the state. You lose title to it and it becomes state land. So what Israel does is it prevents Palestinians from cultivating their lands, and then under Ottoman, puts fences around or checkpoints, it prevents Palestinians, and then it reverts to the state. So it's legal in a sense, but obviously it's
Still it.
And the problem that we're saying here also is that the law is disconnected from justice. And when that happens, it can become an instrument of oppression.
That's consistent.
So what we do then is rebuild homes as political acts of resistance, and not humanitarian. The homes can be demolished again. This home, I'm not going to go through the whole story, but this home was demolished 4 times and rebuilt each time. So if this was humanitarian, in a way it would be dumb to pour good money after bad. Why would I ask you for money to rebuild a home that can be demolished again? But we've built 165 homes in the last 10 years, which again, humanitarian-wise, is nothing. What's 165 out of 24,000? But if you look at them as 165 acts of political resistance to occupation, if this is political, where Israelis and Palestinians come together to work, then that's much more meaningful. You see, so we don't ask for permits. We don't, in other words, this is in-your-face civil disobedience. And that's the point of it. Now you asked about where do they go. When the house is demolished, the Red Crescent Society, which is, the Muslim version of the Red Cross, gives families tents. And so they live in tents for a while. And then I'll talk in 1 second about what happens after that. So we rebuild homes. And here again, now you can see how agricultural the land is.
Yes.
Salim says it hasn't been farmed since Adam. Here's Arabia. Arabia between two Israeli women. So it's really a meaningful form of solidarity. I mean, these are families that are scared, they're intimidated, they're financially ruined. They're confronting the Israeli army. The only Israelis they've ever met are soldiers who are now have Israelis, and Ellen and Denise, some others can testify to this, because Benedict Camps and Elise and others, that it's very meaningful when Israelis come and build with them. There's something they can do actively. They're getting that kind of support. It takes weeks to build a house. It takes solidarity action. But it's just as important for the Israelis and the internationals that come, because it really is a meaningful form of resisting. We work with Palestinians.